that it must be good as aesthetic, and that seems to have served you well. You're
It's
a
turned out okay.
features editor, right?
Yeah.
So but overall, and I'm not digging for anything, I'm just curious, working for something like the New Times, which has been pretty much as long as, in the 25 plus years, I guess, that I have followed the music scene or been interested in arts and culture, that's been the go-to rag in Phoenix, to pick up and read about upcoming shows and reviews and all that sort of thing, or at least that's what I always zeroed in on, skipping past all the very well-researched journalism, I'm sure. And then also, keeping away from the pot and strip club ads in the back. But you were there long enough for sure to see the rise of the digital platform and the cultural shift. And what was your experience both overall for the New Times and how you saw it change while you were there? This is the deep question point of the show.
Okay, so what was the first part of the question?
I don't remember anymore.
What did I learn?
It took me so long to ask the question. I don't even remember.
What did I learn and how did it change?
So how did you, not necessarily what did you learn, but what your experience was there? How, personally, good and bad, how you dealing with parent companies and how, the whole politics of the thing, as much as you'd care to go into, just an idea of what it was like to work for them for the period of time that you did.
I can say it was incredibly intense. There was a lot demanded of me and my coworkers. We worked super hard to do a good job, and certainly a lot of that stemmed from Amy Silverman, who was my boss and my editor for almost the entire time I was there. I don't know how to answer what my experience was like beyond that. It was a lot of work. And a lot of it was extremely gratifying. I got to pursue projects. I got to write about fashion in Phoenix, which is arguably, most people would say that's not a thing. It doesn't exist. But I promise there are pockets of people doing really exciting, interesting things. I got to do 2 rounds of a series called 100 Creatives. That was also, like I said, extremely gratifying to talk to people, to interview people who are super passionate about what they do and don't always find themselves in the spotlight. I found so many little niches of Phoenix in finding 100 people every other summer to talk with about whatever they did, whether that was being a choreographer or a painter or a teacher or a sculptor or, someone who does lighting for theater, But yeah, it was a lot of really, really long hours and a lot of figuring out, what should we be doing? What should we be covering? What's compelling? What's actually interesting? And what makes sense for this brand where we're, a little bit edgy, a little bit snarky, but also really pride ourselves on being the experts, knowing Phoenix better than anyone. So, yeah, I think in a word, intense.
Intense, yes. Yeah. The shift then to the Arizona Republic, which is basically the last Phoenix newspaper. I mean, it's the state, but it's, any of the other sort of, I don't even know if the, was it the Gazette or something like that was around for a little while?
Oh,
something,
sure.
Things like that are gone, and newspapers are are a hard medium to sell, and the movement, that this is the point at which you get into working for the USA Today Network, Arizona Republic thing.
Yeah.
And I've talked to Barbara Vandenberg and Ed Masley, and people, Barbara in particular, sort of lamented a little bit, like the over the period of time that she's been there, seeing the Republic offices shrink down and, resources being spread very thin. So with that cheery visual in mind, what was that experience going over and working for them? How did that differ from working for a place like the New Times?
Yeah, I mean, so Barbara's experience is totally different from mine. Mm-hmm. Like I said, I just completed week 3 of my new job. Mm-hmm. So I can say, while I was interviewing for the job that I'm doing right now, one of the things that I found really exciting and appealing was seeing how many resources they have, mm-hmm. and how robust it looks coming from New Times.
Gotcha.
When I was working there were maybe like 10 full-time staffers on the editorial side.
Well, that's not much for what gets put out.
Accurate. Yeah. So compared with the infrastructure of AZ Central, I mean, it's like, oh my God, I can do so much stuff, So it's a weird time to be starting that job, but I mean, it's a weird time to be in journalism.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And what is, if you don't mind my asking, what is the role and responsibilities of a features editor?
Sure. So I oversee all the fun stuff. So dining, music, things to do, culture.
Okay.
All that good stuff. So I work with 3 editors. Oh, and travel. I can't believe I forgot travel. Forgive me. But I work with 3 editors and then their reporters, and we are doing our best to kick ass and cover Phoenix and Arizona and beyond,
So what is the ratio of your covering and writing something to having to go through other people's work, let's say? I mean, how much are you getting to write these days versus how much are you having to edit other people's work?
Yeah,
and take submissions for that.
As far as me writing as part of this job, it's not a huge part of it. Mm-hmm. I haven't written anything yet. I'm still very much in the learning and figuring things out phase. But yeah, it's a lot of kind of management.
Gotcha.
There's a saying, it's like the better you get at the thing that you love doing, like the further away you get from actually doing it, right? So it's a lot of like working with people and planning things and meetings, projects, calls, strategy, like, okay, we want to cover this and this and this. How do we do that in a way that's really meaningful for the people we want to reach, as opposed to like, ooh, I'm going to write this cool thing, you know? It's more coordinating and kind of big picture-y. Mm-hmm. But I still make time for writing. I mean, I did Barflies this past week, and I feel like that's a fun outlet that's, not journalistic, but rewarding creatively. Mm-hmm. And then, I mean, my friend Katie Johnson and I have a skincare and makeup blog.
Sense and Sensitivity.
Sense and Sensitivity, where we write about the skincare and makeup that we love and hate. Mm-hmm. That's definitely more of like a passion project sort of thing, though, that, we don't necessarily have time to devote to every week, but it's super fun.
Now, to kind of that sounds, no offense, that sounds like my nightmare.
Why?
I wait,
the makeup part?
Well, no. make it's no. Okay. It just doesn't factor into my worldview necessarily. I think it's a cool thing that you guys are doing because there's definitely, I have just some, I guess, little basic experience with having like skin allergies to things or something like that. But to kind of navigate that world for somebody who is just in that all the time of needing to read the backs of various containers of things,
right?
I'm sure that anyway, it's just not something that I would necessarily call to as a resource. But I have read some of the articles and I like the writing.
Why, thanks.
You're welcome. But no, the idea of I've had various management experience things throughout my life, and I've done my damnedest to get away from that as much as possible.
Yeah.
It's something where I did go for a little while and try to climb that ladder, I suppose, and prove that I could do it, because I also have that unfortunate trigger of wanting somebody to know that I'm capable of doing something and also capable of doing it better than them. So that's a blessing and a curse. But
yeah,
it's at this point I can't. I like being able to only have to worry about myself. Anytime I find people more and more annoying the older I get.
Fair.
And that just continues to be true. So having to deal with people all the time and make phone calls and be nice to people or pleasant enough.
I didn't say I'm being nice all the time.
I can imagine you could get away with it more though. Now, I did want to get into Barflies, because that seems like a really cool curated project. I've been involved sort of tangentially with storytelling shows. I record bi-weekly, but a weekly storytelling open mic show. Shout out to Chatterbox. And then, I've told a couple of times at Dan Hull's show. And so I have some experience with it, but it sounds like what Barflies does is much more curated, and certainly by the time you guys get your stories to stage, they're pretty well nailed down. It reminds me of a couple of times I went to Tanya Katan's show, Lit Lounge.
Yeah.
So it seems to me a little bit like that. But can you, and I'm sure Amy Silverman would be a better person to ask about the entire project, but
totally,
as far as your experience with it, can you give me an idea of what Barflies is about and sort of what the process is to both get included and then get to the stage point?
Sure. Yeah. So I know that Amy and Katie Johnson, who does Sense and Sensitivity with me, they run Barflies, and they take, I don't know if the right word is submissions, but they like having people raise their hands and say like, hey, I want to do that. Hey, I want to try that. Like, can we work me in? They also do a workshop series where you basically like come together with a group of people and you take that day to write stories to whatever the theme is. And then that night you read your story on stage. So that's kind of a good way to get in the mix if anyone listening is a writer who wants to kind of dip a toe in. But in my experience, it's been like, hey, we have this one coming up. Do you maybe want to do this? And I say, yes. The one this past week, the theme was my pet. So I wrote a piece about my two dogs and the time they poisoned themselves like dumbasses. They drank a bunch of black tea. Very annoying and stressful. But I wrote the piece and turned it into Amy. She gives notes, kind of talk through the piece. You do a rehearsal session, and then kind of work through it and then read it live on stage. Yeah, so I feel like that's kind of the main difference between like storytelling and what Barflies is. Barflies is a reading as opposed to storytelling. Yeah.
Yeah.